What we're going to do next is we're going to add some texture to our robot, just so that the body and the arms look a little bit more like metal, a little bit more like brushed metal, if you will. And in order to accomplish that, we're going to be using some of the effects in Illustrator to create the illusion that this has a little bit more of a texture than it currently does. Because ultimately I'm going to want to be able to take this character into another application and animate it, I need to think ahead a little bit and think about the different parts of the robot and how I might want them to move or interact independently of each other. If this was just going to be a flat piece of artwork, then I could apply this effect to everything all at once. But because I'm going to want to be able to control the different pieces independently, I'm going to have to break it up. So I'm going to demonstrate how to apply the effects to the body, and then I'll show you how we can easily copy them and apply them to the arms and anywhere else we might want to have them. So let's begin by selecting the body portion. I'm selecting that outer outline, which is the entire body of our robot. We're going to go ahead and copy this. And then what we'll do is we'll just do a edit paste in place. So I'm going to paste this in place. Let's go ahead and grab one of our fill colors. So I'm going to apply my lighter orange color, and you can see that this is going to be applied. We'll remove the stroke. So I'm going to get rid of the stroke. And as you can see, it now looks like our robot is brown, but what we're going to do is we're going to use this color along with some effects and some blending modes to create this texture that we're going to want to apply to the robot. So the first thing that I'm going to do with this shape is we're going to go ahead and we're going to apply one of the effects. And the effect that we want to use is the scribble effect. So in Illustrator, if you go to effects, you'll see that there is a bunch of different categories with a bunch of different types of effects. These top set of effects are all Illustrator or vector-based effects. The bottom series of effects are Photoshop effects, and they're more like raster effects. We can still use the Photoshop effects on vector artwork, but it is no longer going to be completely vector. We're applying an effect that will force it to rasterize. So just keep that in mind. We're going to go to Stylize, Scribble, and we'll apply the scribble effect. And as you can see, it's going to open up the scribble dialog box. So we have a lot of different options that we can apply using the scribble sort of effect. The first thing that we can do is we can control the angle. So I'll leave this at 30 because I think that that's going to work pretty nicely. The next option is our path overlap. And if we increase this, you're going to see how the scribble goes outside of the original shape. If we decrease it, it's going to be applied inside of the shape, but it'll be smaller. So for our purposes, we just want this to be 0. We want it to fill the entire existing shape. Variation, you can increase this and it'll be a little bit outside and a little bit inside, but again, we don't want any sort of variation, so we'll just bring that down. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to control the stroke width. So as you would expect, if we increase the stroke width, the stroke is going to get thicker, and you might need to hit the tab key or just move into another one of the dialog boxes. Obviously this is too thick, but if we decrease this down to 1 and hit tab, you can see what we get. And you can use your arrow keys on your keyboard. So if I use like 2, this is a scribble effect of 2. It also is worth mentioning that you can use fractional elements. If I went ahead and wrote like 0.5, then, we're getting a smaller type of stroke. So let's, for our little robot, use 0.75. We'll just make it slightly smaller than the 1. The curviness is going to make the scribble more curvy, and you can see it looks more loopy. If we keep it at angular, it's going to be more in the angular type of setting. So for our robot, we're going to leave this at 0. We don't want any sort of curviness, although I am going to just keep the variation. And again, this will, is adding a tiny little bit of curviness. So I'll use a variation of 2 just so it has a little more variety. And then spacing, as you would expect, if we increase this number, the lines are spread out. If we decrease it, they're tighter together. So let's go ahead and use spacing of maybe 3, and then we can vary that as well. So obviously increasing that, we'll get different sorts of variations. And then if we decrease it, it's going to be a little bit more uniform. So I think 2 probably looks pretty good. And obviously you can experiment around and play with these different values to see what's going to work the best. I'll click OK to accept these settings. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to open up the Appearance palette. So the Appearance palette is going to track all of the various settings that you might have applied to any vector element. You can augment the settings, so you can change your fill and or stroke color. You can control the opacity, and it will track any sort of effect. And anytime you apply an effect, it is a live effect, which means that you can always go back and edit it. So if you weren't happy with these changes, you would simply click Scribble, and it would open this up, and then you would have the option to make further changes. In addition to that, we can control the opacity, and we have the opacity of the effect itself or the opacity on the fill. So I'm going to come to the opacity on the fill, and I'll open this up, and this opens up our transparency panel, which you can also access by going to this icon right here, but we'll just access it from here. And we're going to go ahead and reduce the opacity down. So let's just change that to maybe like 50. It's going to make it lighter. And then we can also experiment with the blending modes. So if you've never used blending modes, they will take the layer on top, and it's going to control how it mixes with the underlying layer. So you can see as I kind of try different things, we get different sorts of results. And you'll probably need to experiment to find what resonates best with you. But for my purposes here, I'm going to use this overlay at 50%. And you can already see it kind of adds just a little bit of a brushed sort of texture to our robot. The next thing that I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to go to our layer panel. So I'm going to open up my layers. And in the layer panel, we currently only have one layer. We haven't really dealt with layers. But when you're dealing with vector information, you can open up any layer and all of the individual pieces are going to be accessible. So we can select things from this layer panel. We can rearrange things. So if I grab the eyes and put them underneath the scribble effect, then that's going to sit on top of the eyes, and you can control the various elements by using this panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click to the right of the name path right here, which will allow this particular element to be selected. This is another way we can select items inside of Illustrator. And with this selected, I'm going to go to the wing menu of the layer panel, and we're going to select duplicate. And that's just going to make an exact copy. So when I duplicate this, you can see that the effect intensifies, and that's because we're now applying 2 instances of the effect. So I'm going to select the new version of the effect, and we're going to come and change the fill color. So I'll come to my swatch panel, and we're just going to select that darker shade of red, and you can see it just slightly changes what was going on before. Then we're going to step back to the appearance panel, and we're going to change the blending mode. So I'm going to click on opacity, and I think for this one I would prefer to use screen, and let's reduce the opacity down on this layer. So we'll try maybe like 25%. And again, you might want to experiment around. You might want to try different things. You'll get different sorts of results depending on what exactly it is that you're doing. But this is a way that you can augment. And if you use multiple layers and experiment with blending modes and colors and all that good stuff, you're going to get different sorts of results that are going to affect the particular element. The next thing I'm going to do is I'll go back to my layers, and I'm going to select the top layer, which it currently is selected. We're going to go to Effect, and we're going to go to Path, Offset Path. And Offset Path is a way that you can either increase or decrease a path. So by default, the offset is 10. It's going to increase the overall bounding area of the path by about 10 points. If you want it to shrink, you're going to use negative numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and type -3. And it's real subtle, but it just kind of brings in that upper layer of the scribble in slightly, which is kind of what I want it to do right here. So I think that that works pretty well. And then what we're going to do is we're going to apply another effect to this. So I'm going to go to Effect. We're going to go to Distort and Transform, and we're going to select Roughen. And the Roughen effect, you can see it's bleeding out here a little bit, but the Roughen effect is going to allow you, if we increase the size, you can kind of see it, it'll allow you to create these kind of interesting types of random effects. So this is going to create a little bit more randoming. Right now, if we increase the detail, these little explosion lines, if you will, kind of get more random and shoot out in different directions. What I will use here is I'm going to go ahead and change my detail down, maybe like 30. And obviously we don't want the size to be quite so big, but before I change the size, we can also change the points. So if we use smooth points, they're a little bit more rounded and corner points are a little bit more angular. So I'm going to use smooth, and we will decrease this amount drastically. Let's maybe just try like 4, and that's even a little high. I don't want the roughen effect to force my artwork to kind of spill outside the bounding box. So it looks like 2 is going to work pretty well for that. I'll click OK. And if you did want to intensify this effect even more, you could go to the wing menu, duplicate that particular layer, and you can see it just kind of sits on top and it will make it more intense. We could experiment with the blending modes. So maybe on my fill, instead of using the screen, I might want to try another blending mode of like overlay or something like that. You could layer these on in whatever way feels right to you. But I think just having the 2 layers is probably working pretty well. So I'm just going to select this duplicated version and I'll just hit delete to delete that because I kind of like the way this looks better. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to select this upper layer. So that's what it looks like without it. And here's the upper layer. So I'm going to select the upper scribble layer and we're going to soften it just a little bit by going to Effect, and we'll use Stylize Feather. Let's use a radius of 3 and that will just kind of soften that a little bit. So again, I know it's hard to see because I've already turned down my opacity and I'm using blending modes, but if we went back to the appearance palette and if we just change this to normal and we up the opacity, you would be able to kind of see what this is doing. So I can control these effects in the appearance palette by turning them on and off. So here's what it looks like without feather. You can see how it just kind of smears or smudges the edges. Here's our roughen. So the roughen just makes it a little more random. And then the offset path, it just kind of brings it in a little bit. So we're going to leave all those, but I'll come back to my opacity setting and let's set this back to 25. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my screen blending mode again. And as you can see, with the combination of these 2 layers, we're able to add a subtle texture to our character. So this is what the body looked like previously. It was just kind of flat artwork. And you can see by adding these, we've just added a little bit more interest to our character. There is one more thing I'm going to do on the body. So I'm going to come to this layer, which is the actual colored body. Remember that we grouped that together. I'm going to select that group of elements and we're going to go ahead and use our paintbrush and we want to paint inside. Now paint inside is not going to let me do that on a grouped element. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem. So what I can do in lieu of that is I can tore this open, and then I can access the individual pieces. So I'm going to just select the lighter shade of blue, which is this one right here. And we're going to go ahead and click Paint Inside. And now that the Paint Inside mode is on, I can change my fill color. So we'll go ahead and change this to white. And I'm going to go to my brush panel, which we looked at earlier. And I'm just going to get one of these kind of like scribbly, chalky types of brushes. Let's try this one right here. And we're just going to make a little bit of a swipe. Now that swipe is not quite long enough and it's pretty thick, so I'm going to do undo. Let's reduce the size of the stroke. I'll try 0.5. And I'm just going to kind of draw in here like that. So I like that. I just want a little like highlight, a little shine. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my layer panel and I'm going to select the stroke. So now the stroke is selected. We'll go to the appearance panel, and on the stroke I'm going to use a blending mode so we can experiment around with the various blending modes. Multiply isn't going to do anything, but soft light, it works pretty well. Actually, I kind of like that. So I think I'll use soft light right there. And that's it. I'm just going to add that little bit of a highlight. So I like that. It just kind of adds something else to our character. I'm really liking the way that this is looking. I'm going to exit my Paint Inside and switch back to my selection tool. And now what I want to do is I want to apply the same sort of effect to the arms and to the grabber hands. So let's look and see how we can do that. I'm going to select the arm, and I just want the outer part of the arm. If you recall, we have a stroke there. So again, it's going to probably be easier to come into our layer panel. You can see that the arms are grouped. And what we want to access here is the sausage, if you will. So that is right here. So I'm going to go ahead and select the sausage. With the sausage arm selected, I want to create a copy of this. So in this case, if we select duplicate layer, it's going to duplicate the entire grouped portion of this arm. I don't want that to be the case. What I want to do is I just want to duplicate this one portion. So like if I went to duplicate layer 1, it's going to just create an entire copy of layer 1. You can see I have 2 layer 1s. That's not what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this. We're going to just use our edit copy. Then we'll use our edit and we'll say paste in place. And now we have 2 of these little sausages. And then I'll go to my swatch panel right here and we're going to select our tan color. And I just made it the stroke, so let's swap these so it's the fill. So there it is. And instead of me having to recreate all of these effects that we had used and all of the settings, what we'll do is we're going to select our original fill that has the scribble, and I'm going to go to the appearance palette. So you can see here is the effect right here. And what we want to do is we want to come here and we want to save this. We want to save this effect, the opacity, the blending mode, the scribble, everything that we applied, so that we can apply it to this new element that we have on our screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this out as a style. We're just going to make sure that this whole component is selected. And if we go to the graphic styles, we can click the little plus sign, which is going to allow us to create a new graphic style. So I've saved that out. And now that I have that, I can select my arm, and let's make sure we have the correct piece of the arm. So I'm going to grab the brown piece. If we come back to the graphic styles and we click, you're going to see that I've instantly applied that effect. Because the arm is pretty small, I don't think I need both of those layers. I'm just going to create one, and I'll do the same thing for the grabber hand. And then we'll do the same thing on the arm on the other side. I'll just repeat this once more so you can see how it works. I'm going to select the grabber hand. The grabber hand is only grouped with the whole arm. I don't have a bunch of other pieces. So again, we just want to duplicate that. And in order to do that, I'm just going to copy. I'll use an edit paste in place. Now we have 2 grabber hands, and with the top grabber hand selected, I'll come to my graphic styles and simply click this, and it applies the effect. So if we zoom in a little bit, you can see the difference between these two sides. This one has the effect applied, this one does not. But it's pretty easy to be able to apply the effects without having to recreate everything. We just save it as a graphic style. So I'll just do the same thing on the other arm. We'll come into the other arm. We know that we're going to want to duplicate the hand, so I'll select that. I'll use my Command or Control C, and then I'm going to use Edit, Paste in Place, and with the uppermost one selected, we'll come to Graphic Style, apply the graphic style like so, and then let's go ahead and do the same thing on the arm. Coming back to the layers, we'll twirl open our arm. We'll select the outlined stroke portion of the arm, edit copy, edit paste in place, and then with that upper version selected, we'll come to our graphic styles and just simply apply the graphic style. And that's pretty much it. Now our robot has texture on all of the metal portions, and I just want to reiterate that because I ultimately am going to want to be able to use these arms and animate these arms, maybe we would want to be able to rotate it or whatever. That's why I'm applying the textured effect independently to these different pieces, so that that texture will travel with the rest of the artwork. If this was just a flat piece of artwork, I could have just created one shape and applied the effect to everything in one go. But this is what we'll do for this particular project because we're going to ultimately want to take this into another program and animate it. As you can see, Illustrator has a slew of ways that you can get super creative. You can apply all sorts of different effects, and there's some pretty cool things in here. Just to show you a couple really quickly, I'm going to just draw an elliptical type of shape. So here's just a perfect circle. And if we go into effects, for instance, and use pucker and bloat, you'll see that this allows us to, if we bloat, it kind of allows us to create these like little weird flower type shapes, and we can keep bloating and it just makes some kind of crazy sorts of artwork and shapes. And if we pucker, we have a lot of options here. So we can start with something really basic and apply these different sorts of effects, and you can always layer them on. So I have the pucker and bloat. If we come back to distort and we use a twist on this, if you use your up and down arrow keys, you can apply the twist. And for whatever reason, when you're using your up and down arrow keys, you don't get a preview. So you'll have to kind of uncheck preview and then check that back on. But you can see how it's twisting our element. So if I really pump this up to like 90 and we preview it, I get something like this that's been twisted around. This artwork is essentially still a circle, but it's a circle that has these various effects that have been applied to them, which allows you to create all sorts of interesting types of shapes. I also just wanted to mention that ultimately this is still a circle. If you wanted to be able to turn this into vector path, you're going to select that shape. And if you go to Object and you go to Expand Appearance, this will expand the appearance. And in the Appearance palette, you can see how the effects have disappeared. And now I see the anchor points and the Bezier handles for this particular shape. So I've actually removed the effects. I can't edit them anymore, but now this is an actual shape as if we created it by hand. So this is another way that you can create pretty complex artwork real quickly with just basic shapes. Take a little bit of time and check out the effects, try them on different sorts of basic elements and see what you get. There's all sorts of creativity packed into this panel of Illustrator.